All right, welcome back to another episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Patrolman Barta from Vestal PD in New York. He is third generation law enforcement. I'm actually really looking forward to this conversation. We've talked offline a little bit, and he has a really compelling and engaging story. And so I'm looking forward to sharing that with you all today. Welcome to the show, Patrolman Barta. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I like I said in the intro, I'm really looking forward to this. You have a background that I can relate to, and I want to, share that with others, but really you have a story of growth and perseverance. And before we hop into anything, I was hoping that maybe we can just kind of get intros, going, and anyone who doesn't know you, you're third generation. How did you get started in law enforcement? How long have you been in law enforcement, and what has that looked like for you so far?
Um, so my name is Dan Barta. I'm a patrolman with Vestal Police. I'm from born and raised in Binghamton, New York. I'm third generation law enforcement. My grandfather, James Mullane, was a Binghamton police officer, and he ended up retiring as the Binghamton fire chief, I believe in 93. And my dad was a Binghamton police officer, canine handler. He was killed in line of duty in 1995. I was 6. My sister was 1.5, and my mom was pregnant with my brother.
Hmm.
And I am fortunate enough to have a lot of memories of my dad, especially, unfortunately, the day that we found out that he was shot and killed on duty. But even before that happened, I always wanted to be a police officer. I wanted, my dad was my hero. He still is, and my grandpa. And I just always felt like it was what I was going to do. It was what I was meant to do.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Um, it's interesting for me to hear that your grandpa went from police to fire. There's always that joke of like, what do police and fire have in common? And then you hear it both ways. They both want to be
Mhm.
police officers or they both want to be firefighters. And then your dad following in your grandpa's footsteps of being in law enforcement, and then you growing up saying, that's what I want to be, and he's my hero. Was there anything that you saw your dad do that made you feel that way? Was there anything about the job that you were like, man, that's it, that's the reason, or was it him?
I'd say a combination of both.
Mm.
My grandfather, who was my not he never tried to be my dad, but he was my living hero up until he passed away in 2016. He was like very smart, very squared away. He was just everything that a man should be.
Mm.
And I idolized my grandpa, and him and my dad were like best friends. It's actually not his father; it's my mom's dad.
Mm.
Um, so that made the dynamic even that much more how close they were. And I remember I must have been 4 or 5 when my dad was training canines. I'd run in the woods and run tracks with them, and my dad brought me everywhere. I'd work out with them, or try to work out with them in the gym at Binghamton. I was just around the PD from my earliest memories. I've just always kind of been around the Binghamton Police Department.
Yeah. What was that like, losing your dad? What did your childhood look like after that?
Um, it was rough. It still affects us all to this day, and it's been 30 years. This past August 3rd, 95 was when he was killed. Um, Everyone deals with grief in their own way. I've carried a lot of anger my whole life over it, and I never really worked through it. And no one ever told me or expected me to be the man of the house, so to say, at the age of 6.
Mm.
Um, but I think it's just something I did myself. And I think that put a lot of outside pressure because I knew growing up in the police department, everybody meant well. nobody had any ill intentions, but I think knowing that people were watching me, like my last name is very well known in this area. Um, I just wanted to always do the best that I could, and in turn, a lot of stuff that I never processed or dealt with. Um, I mean, even to this day, it's hard for me to talk about my dad. I get pretty emotional talking about him or my grandpa.
Yeah. It's really heavy, as a young kid to not know how to process those things and to almost feel like you have to live up to a certain expectation of, what
Mm.
others are expecting of you. Um, how did you learn to, I don't want to say learn to survive. I think that's maybe something that I felt like I did in my childhood was just kind of posture up and learn to survive. And when you said that you were really angry, I can relate to that feeling as a kid too, and the things that I had gone through in my life. But how did you posture up and keep going? What were the things that helped you to continue on after that? Or do you feel like it was kind of just shove it down and do your best?
I think a lot of it was shove it down and do my best. Only, and a lot of it was internalized. Like again, it wasn't outside. Nobody ever expected me to do anything more than be a kid.
Yeah.
And I also took it upon myself, just I guess because I grew up like intellectually so fast with always being around adults and kind of un unintentionally being like kind of the center of attention, so to say. Um, I wanted to be strong for my younger brother and sister, and my mom, who is incredible. She ended up, while raising three kids, going back to school, getting her master's degree. Like, as weird as it is to say, I had a pretty normal childhood aside from my dad being killed and being a survivor of domestic violence at one point with a brief stepdad. But I guess since it was so hard for me to relate to other people, as you know, in middle school with this that being over like on my mind, I kind of just shut it out completely.
So you
Which now I can say now that was not something I ever, no one should do.
Yeah. So you put extreme pressure on yourself.
I did. My again, not from my family, but like my family, we're all just kind of the way we're ingrained. We're all perfectionists,
Yeah.
and I didn't want to be the weak link.
Yeah.
I wanted to be more so as an example. And again, I don't really know where that came from. I kind of just did it. I don't know if it's from me hearing people make not jokes, but just say, you know, oh, well, you're the man of the house or something, like just simple little terms. But at 6, 7 years old, I think I just internalized it and took it 100% at truth.
Yeah. I know that you mentioned, and I'll kind of let you maybe speak to this to the level of your comfortability, but you talked a little bit about a short period of time with your stepdad and some of the things that you had experienced during that time, and if you're willing to kind of elaborate a little bit on that. But my kind of follow-up question to that is, do you think that the experiences that you had losing your dad so early and the experience that you had with being a survivor of domestic violence, do you think that made it hard for you to relate to other people your age? Or do you feel like you had any sort of judgments for other people who maybe didn't go through some of those things that you had?
Um, I, yes, I can say both. So yeah, I was in fifth grade, so I was like maybe 11, 12. My mom remarried briefly to a guy named Mark, and I don't know, we never really liked them, but that's whatever. But it all came to the end after my dad's Memorial Golf tournament. Ironically, he got absolutely hammered, and he was pretty aggressive. And my brother and sister went to my mom's parents' house, and I went home with my mom. And Mark was there, and I remember upstairs playing video games or something, and I heard my mom scream. Me and mom have always been extremely close. So I came downstairs to see what was wrong, and I saw Mark punching her and just attacking her. So my 12-year-old self grabbed a sign stake, and I ran at him, yelling, "Get off my mom!" And in turn, he tried to attack me. Um, and luckily, that's the last time I ever saw him in person. But also, no one really knows that story. That's another thing that I've kind of kept down, and I think that compounded. I never talked about that to anybody, and I've been angry at that for years. Like that's just been a burning fire that I'm just pissed seeing my mom get hit.
Yeah.
I've never been able to let that go.
Yeah. One of the things, and I don't know if we talked about this offline, but I experienced domestic violence myself around similar age. Um, and one of the things that I realized, and it wasn't maybe at the time, but now I think, you have different perspectives when you get older and you start kind of working through some of those things. But um, I found it extremely hard to relate to people my age. I kind of developed this attitude of like, you don't know what I've been through, and like, you haven't been through anything because you haven't been through what I've been through. And so I remember having almost resentment towards other people who were my age. And I had like developed this anger in myself too, where I was like so angry, not only about the things that had happened in my life, but angry almost that like no one else had dealt with it either. And I know that sounds so weird because like you wouldn't wish that on anybody, but it was like I felt so alone that it was like it made me more angry that like other people, like when they would, talk about things that I didn't view as that big of a deal, but for them it was almost like this comparison of like, well, you don't know what I've been through. And on the flip side of it, I never wanted people to know the messy parts of my life. I didn't want people like on the surface, I think I wanted to fit in and I wanted people to like me, or I wanted people to think I was like quote unquote normal. And so there were a lot of things that I didn't want to share with my peers. And so, that word that you said compounded, I really related to that because it felt to me like the only way that I could, on the surface present myself in a way that was, quote unquote normal, was to
Mhm.
shove it down and to posture up and to give this image of like, I'm fine, everything is fine. But beneath the surface, there was so much anger and resentment going on that later would bubble to the surface and manifest itself in really negative ways. Did you feel any of that, like kind of growing up? And um, I guess my next question is, you know, because you entered into a career that then exposes you to even more
Mhm.
trauma. And I know it's something that you always wanted to do. Did you have any fear coming into this profession, or did you maybe understand that you were going to be exposing yourself to even more trauma that would compound over time?
Yeah, so first, I completely agree with everything you said. Up until about the last year of my life, which we'll get into later, um, I had a very hard time pretty much my whole life feeling empathy for people outside of like family and close friends, but just your everyday person, especially like in college or early when I started at like the security level before I became a police officer. You know, the stories that should invoke empathy or compassion, I had a very hard time relating because I'm like, okay, that's not a big deal. Like, get over it. Same thing when
Exactly.
um, someone, I mean, it's sad to say because like I love dogs. I've had dogs my whole life, but I would see people like fall apart over a dog, and then old me, I'd just be like, it's just a dog. Like, get over it. Like, people die. That's actually sad. So I definitely felt that. And it wasn't until in the last year, definitely realized it, or the last couple years, and I realized like I'm having an issue with myself
Mm,
because I'm just harboring all this anger that I don't need to.
Yeah.
The guy that killed my dad killed himself the next day. He's done. I will never see him again. The last time I ever saw Mark was the night of that incident. They were divorced very shortly after that. My mom protected us as like any mother would. Um, so I mean, things that I should have let go, I didn't. I just hung on to them, and it was eating me away inside. But I would suppress it to try and fit in with the other normal people, like on my football team, my college friends. I mean, even a lot of my coworkers that I started off at when I started at Binghamton with, that you know they knew who I was because they would see my dad's name everywhere at the station, but they didn't know what I was thinking or feeling.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I completely like agree with everything you said. That's definitely something that has been an issue for me, and I would assume for other people. Just if that happens to you and me, there's definitely other people it's happening to.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, that I realized, and I didn't know this in the beginning because when I started down my own personal like wellness journey or path of trying to offload some of those things and process those things, and then eventually started working in, this wellness space, I first worked with the general public. I didn't initially start working with public safety until, years later. And it was probably another couple of years after that that I started to realize that there are a lot of people who are in this public safety profession who come from adverse childhood experiences and childhood trauma. And um, my question for you is, why do you think, I mean, obviously with your situation, like you said, you always knew you wanted to be in law enforcement. Your dad was your hero.
Mhm.
You're really close with your grandpa, and so that was kind of the path that you have always walked and wanted to lead. But why do you think that maybe there are a lot of people in this profession who do come from um, hard childhood situations? Do you think that there's maybe a particular like burning desire to help people, or is there anything that you can maybe shed some light on with that? Because I don't know if I know the answer to that.
I've heard some theories, and I studied psychology in school. My mom's a therapist, so like I've kind of also been around the wellness stuff a little bit, but I haven't really dove into it until last year.
Yeah.
But one theory that I've heard come up a lot of times is comfort, which struck me as odd at first, but then as I reflected on myself, it made a lot of sense. I again on the outside, it seemed like I was completely normal, but on the inside, like I was just angry, and I enjoyed the chaos, I guess you could say. Like all the calls I liked going to at work were stressful, big calls, but I felt more calm in those situations than
Mm,
your everyday fender bender. Like those are. I don't really know how to describe it, but I could say it could be some type of comfort level. Also, probably there is a layer, I know for me, and I've talked to some other people, especially at one point when I was surrounded by other first responders. It is to help people so that we've been through it and we don't want it to happen to somebody else. Um, like I guess the majority of first responders, like a very traumatizing incident is, anything related to infants and kids.
yeah.
So if you have a bad childhood, you want to prevent that from somebody else if you can,
Yeah.
whether it's police, fire, EMS, or whatever the first line response is. You don't want that cycle to repeat.
That's really
And I can,
interesting. It's really interesting that you said comfort, and I've never thought of it that way, but now that you say that, I've had other conversations on this podcast where they didn't say that exact thing, but it was almost alluding to that of like, I thrive or feel more comfortable in the chaos than I do in like the down times, right?
Mhm.
And, it's interesting that you say that because before I started working on processing all the things, I could not sit with myself for long periods of time. Like silence killed me. Like it was so uncomfortable. Like I did not want to sit with myself because that's when all of the things that I had shoved
Mhm.
down start to come up, right? You're like left with your thoughts. And so for
Yeah.
me, always staying busy, always trying to do stuff so that I wasn't sitting with myself. And it was a long time of learning and having a mentor that, sat me down and was like, hey, like, you got to do it. You got to be able to sit with yourself, that I was able to then be able to do that and find comfort in that. But it's really interesting that you said that because I can relate, to wanting things to be busy and, um, I don't know if I necessarily wanted things to be chaotic, but maybe I did. But I think it makes sense, like you said, like the distraction, the quick pace, like you're used to chaos. And so that's where you feel like more comfortable and like you can thrive and operate more in those situations.
Even in daily life too. Like I know, up until recently, like I always wanted to do something. I wanted to fill my time by staying busy with
Mm,
whatever it was, chores, errands, something. And then, yeah, the at times if I would be alone, there'd be nothing wrong in the world like going on. Everybody's happy, healthy, and I would just sit there and start spiraling of my own thoughts and emotions that would like creep in on me, and I couldn't handle it. I hated it.
yeah. Well, and that's why we hear about all of the different like coping mechanisms for these things, right? Escaping,
Mhm.
avoiding, numbing, because the processing part and the dealing with it is so much more painful and it's harder to do that than it is to distract yourself or, numb it away or avoid it. My question for you, and this kind of goes back to what you said before, is do you think that the experiences you had in your childhood, do you think that that helped shape you in your career? Like, do you think that those hard times gave you maybe a different perspective on how to connect and treat people? I know we talked about kind of the empathy part of it, and I completely agree with you on that. Excuse me. But do you think that maybe it did give you kind of an edge or even like a superpower to be able to connect with people who were going through similar experiences?
Um, I'd say so, but up until like, are you sorry? Are you referring to coworkers or like people I was talking to on the street, or both?
I think it could be both, either. Um,
I'd say coworkers, not until recently,
mm,
because there still is a giant stigma of
yeah,
speaking out, asking for help. Um, just, I mean, exactly what I'm doing here is like still a no at in the thought process, especially in the older generation.
yeah,
Um, People on the street, I could say yes to a pretty good degree because I could. It almost like gave me a knack to help read people easier, which I still feel like I'm very good at. Um, I could almost tell when somebody was actually needed help, and
mm,
for them, I would definitely go the extra mile. Um, like a call for assistance or something. Like I definitely wanted to help them more because that's what made me want to get into law enforcement, was to help people
yeah,
um, and protect people. I didn't want anything. I guess you could say it was a projection. A lot of the things that I went through and dealt with, I didn't want that to happen again to another 6 year old.
yeah.
So I could say yes to that. It definitely, I mean, it didn't make me any worse at my job.
It's really interesting. I've had this conversation a few times, and I think it's like we said, it's perspective, when you start to kind of look back at things and at the time when you're going through the hardest periods of your life, you're never in this headspace of like, man, this is going to make me better at my job someday. Or like,
Hmm.
man, like this is going to be something that I can really, pull out of my back pocket and it's going to be a strength, that I get to grow and learn from. It's always in those moments where it feels so dark and heavy, and you kind of don't know where the next step is, or where to go or
Mhm.
what to do. And unfortunately, I think that sometimes we have to go through those things in order to come out the other end stronger and to have the opportunity to help people in a better way. And because you went through those things, you do now have the ability to relate to people who are victims and, be able
Mhm.
to be that support system and be able to relate to maybe even, like you said, now that you have the perspective, be able to relate to peers in a way that
Mhm.
you wouldn't have otherwise. And so I do now look back on all the things that happened in my life and try to view them with that perspective of strength and growth and opportunity to help other people. And I think that we all have that ability to look at our lives and our situations in that way, in a positive way. Or we, have the same ability to stay in our situation and stay stuck and
Mhm.
angry and avoiding and numbing and all the things. And so my hope is that, as we have more conversations like this, there's, people who can, hear this and maybe understand that even though the things that you've gone through are so, so hard and um, you wouldn't wish that on anybody, that there's opportunity to help other people and to grow stronger on the other side of things. I know, you went from this childhood with a lot of hard times, then you step into a career that
Mhm.
also exposes you to trauma and difficult situations. What was that like? I know we kind of talked about like compounding. What was your career like and kind of adding to what you had already experienced in your younger life? And how did you deal with that?
So I definitely had my fair share of traumatic calls between both departments. In Binghamton, I had a fair share of a lot of fatal accidents, death. Actually, trying to think, 4 months before I was hired, I was doing a ride along with um, a good friend of mine who ended up being one of my FTOs. I ended up in the middle of a officer involved shooting before I was even on the job. So like that was before I was even on the job. Like I didn't have a gun, but I was in the middle of it. Um, so I mean, I guess you could say my career started off with a bang. And uh, it, one of my friends, Randy, he's in fire. He actually described it very good for across all different departments, but police and fire, and specifically, he said it's a slow burn. It's I think because of me personally, what happened in my childhood and the way I guess I processed it. Um, I didn't feel like any of the calls were bothering me. I always tried to make it a point to not bring work home with me.
Hmm.
Um, if my wife at the time asked how work was, like I would tell her. I wouldn't go into grave details that she doesn't need to know, or that like just nobody needs to know it wasn't there, or if I couldn't say it. But um, I did brush a lot of things off, which I still don't think they bothered me personally, but there are things that definitely stick out of my mind. Certain calls from Binghamton and Vestal, um, two of them that actually I think you could say bothered me more than most calls were actually the look and the reaction of my coworkers' faces who were newer officers, more so than the incident we were dealing with.
Mm,
Their shock and surprise is what affected me more than what we were dealing with.
yeah.
Um, and I don't know. It's all, like you said, perspective. I think I can process the work stuff pretty good. I've made it a point to separate work from personal life. And I think, 12 and a half years in, I've done pretty well, I think, with
Yeah.
that part.
But you had told me that, you know, maybe up until a year ago, all of the things were kind of compounding on each other and they manifested themselves in different ways. And we talked earlier a little
Mhm.
bit about kind of the symptoms of what happens. And I know you talked about like being angry and, some things that were kind of happening beneath the surface and, kind of the avoiding and, escaping and numbing and those types of things. What happened in your life? Like what were the symptoms and how did you deal with those things? Like what were those coping mechanisms that you used and how did that impact you?
So one of my hobbies, constructive hobbies, is weightlifting. I've been working out for, I don't know, 20 plus years now. Um, so that was like my constructive coping mechanism.
Yeah.
But I also loved to drink, but I wasn't ever an everyday drinker. Like I did bouts of like 75 hard or a challenge at the gym. Some of my close friends are not in the first responder world, but they're into like they own gyms or they're fitness people. And I really tried to latch on to them to give me a different perspective.
Mhm.
But for every 6 days in a row, I'd be competing for a weightlifting competition or training for a weightlifting competition. Then on the weekend, I'd go just drink to fall asleep. Just kind of an escape. And I don't really know. I don't have a concrete answer on why. I did some EMDR at one point, and a lot of things that came up were back to my childhood. My dad losing my grandpa in 2016, which I mean, I guess the way I processed that was horribly.
Mhm.
Um, and those images just kept coming up during the EMDR session. And I think subconsciously, when I would try to let go or suppress something, um, work itself, like the calls didn't come up, but a lot of the stuff that started to bleed over towards the end that made, I guess you could say, my drinking worse when I would get on a binge, like politics outside of that directly affected work, um, being in New York. A lot of those things really bother bothered me and still do, but I obviously have not obviously I've learned to cope with it in a totally different way because I'm almost a year sober now.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
I know that's hard, but that's great. You had kind of, and I want you to be the one to kind of explain the series of events that kind of happened and led you to now being a year sober and your kind of
Mhm.
recovery from this. But you said that there was kind of a turning point that happened and some things that maybe happened in your personal life, and then something that led you to kind of go down that road of wellness for yourself. And so I was hoping that you could
Mhm.
maybe explain what the series of events were and how
Mhm.
you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I'll try to make it short, but not too short, so I can hit on all the points. I can say one thing that definitely I would say started the spiral of a lot of things. For me personally, COVID. I did not handle the shutdowns well and everything else. So that kind of just made me mad at the world.
Mm.
And then it kind of compounded a little bit where I went from the happiest moment in my life to very stressed. Our daughter was born in 21, so it was during the COVID stuff. She was a preemie, but even then I had to deal with I'm not trying to get political, but like the mass stuff, and that just really bothered me. And then it prevented us from spending time with our daughter and those rules. So that kind of started my personal anger
Mhm.
coming out again. And then in the spring of 23, um, we were recertifying in defensive tactics, and I got they said between 3 and 4 concussions, but they upgraded it to a TBI in a training accident. Completely, all accidents. Not a cool story on how I got hurt.
Mhm.
Um, but I was out of work for almost 3 months. And during that time, I had very bad memory issues, speech issues. At one point, I remember being in the kitchen with Angela, and I had to text her because I couldn't speak. Like
Mm.
she couldn't understand what I was trying to say, and in my head, I knew what I was saying, but it wasn't coming out. So that was making me even more frustrated. Um, and my resting heart rate, I remember at night, I'd be laying down looking at my Apple Watch, and it was like 120. I'm just laying in bed. And I remember talking to the doctors when I finally got into a concussion clinic, and they said that that might be for the rest of my life because it affected my CNS, and they said that there's no way to really treat it other than time. Because I remember when I walked into the concussion clinic, I failed 7 out of the 7 tests, and that kind of added a personal stress on me. I never heard anything from the department of like whispers or people thinking I was faking it, but it was. I wish I never got hurt in the first place, obviously, but at that point, it was like I wish I just broke my arm. Something somebody could see
Mm.
that has a timetable. This is what I got to do. I can get back. Everything's fine. Because I remember like little things annoying me, like my daughter, my dog, like that never did before, and it was like that turning point when after I got that brain injury, like I just wasn't the same. And also being home from work with not a lot to do, they didn't want me doing much. That's when I kind of really started drinking to pass the time. I'd go, you know, cut the hayfield and I'd just drink. Um, so that kind of led to some issues at home. Then I got cleared, went back to work, but I wasn't the same. At home, I was snapping a lot. My my CNS still wasn't recovered. It actually didn't really get addressed until October of 24. So I mean that was kind of a year long thing that led to more and more issues at home. Um, and then I guess you could say like the big turning point on I guess how I'm on here now. In the spring of 24, me and my wife got divorced. We separated. Um, I was in complete denial of the situation, but I didn't handle it well at all. Like the day I moved out, I drank myself to sleep. I didn't know how to handle it. And then that continued for the entire summer of 24.
Mm.
Pretty much the only time I was sober was between work and putting my daughter to bed. And then after that, I would just drink to fall asleep. And then things started to really spiral out of control in my head because I was still in complete denial of what was happening instead of accepting it or facing it. I was just I wasn't even angry. I was pissed.
Mm. You
I
were,
was in denial of accepting the fact that we were going to be separated, potentially leading to divorce. Which at the time I should have known that that's what was coming, but I just didn't want to hear any of it. I was stuck in my own head, thinking, "Well, I can just make her change her mind." Which you can't control anybody's actions other than yourself. So I was just in this spiral, but I got caught up and like consumed of only thinking about our marriage falling apart, um, stressed that, which again, I'm very fortunate I had the opportunity to, but I was bouncing back and forth between living with my in laws, my mom, and a couple times I'd crash at like a friend's house. So like I also had no stability at home, so to say. Um, and along with that, between stress, drinking, and still all the untreated stuff with my CNS, I was sleeping like maybe 2 hours a night.
mm.
So, but then I would still wake up and work out. My body was just like eating itself. I was just a mess. I can look back at pictures of me literally a year ago that like pop up on my Facebook memories, and even I look at myself and I'm like, wow, I can't believe I just looked like that. Like I looked like I felt. Um, So then that continued on all summer. Some things fell into place. I ended up getting my own house pretty close because my I didn't want to leave my daughter at all. And me and Angela were still like sharing custody of her, which was like great. But then it got to the point where I I started having night terrors, and pretty much every single night I would wake up in a pool of sweat, screaming, um, calling out for my dad, calling out for my grandpa, um, just not even knowing what was going on, like waking up, like shaking, and like it was like I felt like I was the most scared of my life. But the only way I knew how to then get rid of that was then I would just like take a day off work and just drink all day.
Mm.
Um, and then it got um, October 5th. October 5th. I said, all right, fine. I know how to deal with this. I can, I just want to see my dad. So I took a ton of pills and I woke up the next morning. So I was like, shit, I'm still here. So I went to the gym and carried on like nothing happened. But then that day I kept thinking about it and was like, well, why did I do that? Like, that's a dumb way. So I basically, not really a plan, but I decided I'm just going to shoot myself. Um, no way to come back from that. So I basically was not helping myself at all. I was absolutely hammered listening to sad music that made me think of my dad. Um, and right before I told myself I was going to end everything, I gave myself one phone call. I said, I'm gonna call my best friend Colby, who's also my like partner at work. If he answers, I'll wait. If he doesn't answer, I'm gonna kill myself. He answered. He didn't know what was going on because I was so drunk and sad and hyperventilating. He said he thought something was wrong with my daughter, but then he figured out it was me. He lives probably 40 minutes away. He made it to my house in probably 15 minutes.
Wow.
Um, and I can say that he had a part in starting the getting the ball rolling of literally saving my life.
Wow. So you came to this breaking point. You had one failed suicide attempt. And then on the second, you said, okay, if this person answers the phone, and he did,
Mm-hmm.
he came and he was instrumental in helping you. What happened after that? How did you start kind of down that road of, I would imagine at that point you realized that you needed help and needed to be able to process some of these things. So what happened after that?
So I guess it was kind of the same thing as the way I was processing everything going on in my life at that point. I knew I needed help. I just couldn't admit it.
Yeah.
So then when luckily he stayed the night, he stayed here to make sure I was safe. I just went to bed. I passed out. Um, it got I'm um, it got through to another patrolman, or actually a sergeant that we're also very close with. He came over the same night. Um, Sergeant Will. He's also like an instrumental part in why I'm still here. We talked until I fell asleep, and the next day, um, I had a meeting with Chief Kittner, who was on your podcast previously, and Captain Shirley, I've been close with Captain Shirley for years. He was my direct line supervisor for a couple years, and then he was lieutenant. I was captain. Um, and I remember sitting in there thinking, my job's over, my life is over. The only thing that I have left in this world is my daughter. Um, and to my complete shock, which I was still, me and Chief Kittner have joked about it now. I thought I was going to lose my job immediately, but they offered me help, which I didn't expect. at all. I thought it was a meeting about either being fired, putting on leave, or something. Um, and it was the exact opposite. Chief Kittner offered me help and offered me an opportunity to go to Harbor of Grace. It's a inpatient rehab facility for substance abuse and or mental health, and it's only for first responders. And at that point, I was sober, and I said yes. And I guess everyone in the room was actually kind of shocked because they all thought I was going to say no. I
Yeah.
guess they were, before I came in, they were trying to think of a plan on how to get me to go. But at that point, I knew I I needed to say yes, or I wasn't going to be here for my daughter, my mom, like just anybody.
Yeah. You know, the thing that I keep thinking about is, you know, you kept showing up to work and
Mm-hmm.
doing your job, even though you had all these things going on beneath the surface. You know, as you're talking and you're kind of telling your story, you're like, yeah, between this time and this time, I was in so much pain and turmoil, and I had so much anger, and like I was, drinking myself to sleep. But then I would get up and I would do my job, and then I would go home, and then I would rinse and repeat. And so, like, beneath the surface, there's all these things going on. Do you think that there was anything that could have been done before you had gotten to that point? Do you think that there were any signs or there was anything that could have been done? Or do you feel like you hit it so well that no one knew up until the point where you made that phone call?
I can say from talking to people now, nobody knew that I had any aspirations or idealizations of suicide. Um, People around me knew I was drinking and sad and severely depressed over the situation, but I can say people told me they had no idea how much I was drinking. They thought, casually or to get a pretty good buzz. Nobody knew that I was drinking. It's going to sound funny to say, but I made a promise to Angela like years ago that I'd stop drinking liquor. So even through that whole denial phase of me not accepting what was going on, I honored the promise. But I would go out and get like 12% beers, and I'd drink, 20 of them.
Yeah.
So like I was still consuming the same amount of alcohol as if I drank a bottle of Jim Beam, but I just did it with beer instead.
Yeah.
Um, Sorry. Yeah. If are you saying how should I have or could I have caught myself sooner?
No, I'm just curious because I think, one, like, how incredible to have a support system within your organization that
Hmm.
said, hey, we're going to help you, and sat you down and said, what do we need to do to make sure that you get the help? And, for you to say, like, I thought I was going to lose my job, and instead my department supported me. What a powerful statement that is. And, one of the conversations that I have a lot with different organizations and leadership is how do you detect some of those warning signs? Are there signs? How do you get in front of some of these things? How do you save someone's life? And I think that's where my curiosity was is, were there signs that people could have identified? Because I've heard both. I've heard some people that are like, yes, like there are these signs, and other people that are like, we had no idea. And how do you determine that within someone who's struggling, before there's a situation like you found yourself in? And like I said, I'm like so grateful for your organization and for your leadership team to support you in that way, and to want to get you the
Hmm.
help. And I think that was just more of the curiosity of like, how do people, look out for that within their peers? How do you try to identify people who are struggling or suffering in silence?
I think at some points, I think people did notice that I was like, I've never been like a super cheerful person. Like, but I like to joke and laugh and I talk a lot, but I think last summer I heard people say to like my other close friends, they're like, "Is Dan okay?" And they're like, "I think so." People definitely noticed something was off with me because I remember coming into work and just mad. I wouldn't talk to people. Like, one of my passions is hunting and fishing, like outdoors, hunting, fishing, anything like that. I had no interest in it. I didn't want to talk about anything. I just come in, sit in briefing, go out on the road. And it was like a little bit of a break because if I got involved in a call, I wouldn't be thinking about everything else going on. So, like,
Right.
work for a weird way, which I never thought it would be, was actually kind of like a relief for
Yeah.
me for a little bit, that it wasn't everything else going on in my head wasn't consumed with me, because I had to put it out to make sure I did my job and did it, correctly and all that. So I think people noticed, but again, I think I've been told I hit it too well to a
Yeah.
point. Also, me and Angela were pretty private about the separation. People didn't know that there was any issue between us for a couple weeks, months. There are still people I talked to like a couple weeks ago. I like just said it in passing. They had no idea that we're not together anymore. So I'm also a pretty private person, but noticing in other people, I can definitely say if someone has a like with me, like my personality, people said was like 180'd, and if it's not just a day or two, I think that would definitely be a time to, on the side, ask them, like, "Are you okay? Is there something you need?" Because
Yeah.
I mean, you never know what's going on at home. Some of these people, I see them 40, 50 hours a week at work, but then outside of work, we don't communicate. Not in a bad way. We're just not friends outside of work.
Yeah.
That you never know if someone's dealing with something, like, I guess, like what I was going through.
Do you think that that would have helped? Do you think that if someone would have said, like, are you okay? Or do you think that you would have just been like, I'm fine?
I would have said I'm fine,
Yeah.
because I know previously a couple times, Colby asked me if I was okay, if I wanted to talk about it. He was one of the places I slept at his house a couple times. I basically just would vent, and he was a great listener, but no one was going to stop me.
Yeah.
So it took, I guess, my wake up call was, I mean, essentially giving myself an ultimatum, and then in that split second realizing that I almost like potentially ruined my daughter's life.
Yeah. One of the things I was thinking about, because we talked a little bit earlier about stigma, and we have this conversation a lot about like how do you break that stigma? How do we make it so that people don't feel like they have to hide those things, that if someone needs help, they feel confident to ask for it. Or if someone says, are you okay, to be able to talk about these things. And to me, like what your agency did for you and your leadership team, that showcases to everybody else too that
Mhm.
you can come out the other end of it and you can be supported without losing your job. And these things can happen, and we can start to break that stigma through support. And I know when you and I talked offline, you said that you went to this recovery center,
Mhm.
you got the help and the tools that you needed. I would love if you kind of talked a little bit about, some of those things that have helped you. And now you are a year sober and
Mhm.
a year-ish.
Yeah, like two weeks out, but
Yeah.
I I don't want to get cocky or anything like that. But I'm it's been pretty easy for me. I've been cautiously optimistic, but I've been around it. Like, friends still drink around me. It doesn't bother me.
Um,
I just envision my daughter, and I'm a better person without it.
yeah.
Um, it's actually, I made a promise to Angela that I would not drink around Emily, and I just took it as I'm just going to go straight, uh, abstain from alcohol. I'm just better without it.
Yeah. One of the things that I talk about a lot is, having an anchor in your why. And everyone's going to look different, with what that is. But when we talk about like proactive wellness and prioritizing your own wellness. It's like, what is that one thing that is really important to you? Like, what is your why for taking care of yourself? Because what I find in your profession is that you are really good at taking care of other people, but oftentimes forget to take care of yourself, right? It's kind of in your
Mhm.
nature to like be that person to like protect and to serve and to help other people, but then you neglect your own personal well-being.
Mhm.
And so, when it comes to wellness, it's like, what is that why? Like, why is it important for you to take care of yourself? Is it your family, your daughter? Is it maybe your peers and your performance on the job? Is it retirement? What is that thing that is really, really important to you? And then trying to remember that in, the actions that you take every day, because that is the motivation to like keep going. And I
Mhm.
think sometimes when it's just yourself, sometimes it's hard because especially like when we come from a background of, you know, trauma, it's like
Mhm.
you don't necessarily know what it's like to like really take care of yourself because, you never really had that experience growing up.
Yeah, and I mean, the one clear cut like answer would easily be my daughter. Like she
Yeah.
is my entire world. We're together all the time, and she's my little best friend. She's 4 years old, and she's amazing. We actually named her after my dad. Her name is Emily, but we spelled it Emilee. Um,
Cute.
but I'd say like close factors behind Emmy would be um, definitely my family, and a lot of self reflection. I almost felt like it was selfish that if I did kill myself, I can't imagine how my mom or my grandma or my brother or sister, I mean anyone in my family would process that.
Yeah.
Um, so my family is a big motivator for me to like continue on my like wellness path. Definitely coworkers. I can say I attribute like me still being here for the first step of definitely Colby answering the call, Sergeant Will, Captain Shirley, and Chief Kittner all then like helping me, giving me the help and support that I needed. And then in turn with that, now that I can reflect back on it, I don't want any of my coworkers to go through what I went through. I mean, it felt like I was just day in and day out living in like hell on earth. It sucked. I don't want anyone to have like night terrors like I had. It was horrible.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, for again, me personally, one thing is my faith. I gave myself back to Christ when I was down in Maryland. I got rebaptized, and it's been a very center point of my life since then. I grew up Catholic, got away from it for a while, and I met a amazing worker down there named Logan. He was the preacher as well, and we bonded immediately. And I still talk to him to this day. Um, and since then, I could see a big change in myself because another thing that happened with the EMDR thing, on top of my images of like trauma, something that really stuck out to me that I talked to my therapist down there a lot about was images of my childhood church kept coming up.
Mm.
But it wasn't a church where my dad's funeral was. It wasn't a church that my grandpa went to. Like, it's a church that I love here locally. It was St. Patrick's Cathedral, but it, I don't know. But I think that was something that clicked in me, and that it's helped a lot.
Yeah. What does life look like now? What are the things that you're doing now? Because you shared a couple things with me that, have kind of been a result of this. So, um, you know, maybe give a little bit of insight into like the growth part of it.
Um, I've daily journaling has a lot of these things I will 100% attribute to Harbor of Grace. They
Mm,
kind of talked about it, showed us, and it was kind of a, do it if you want. I was all in. I will say that once I accepted the help and went down there, I went all in. Um, the first 3 or 4 days there, I was an emotional wreck. But once I got better, um, uh, daily journaling I think has helped a lot. I started doing it down there every morning and every night, and I did it religiously. And I definitely have fallen off a little bit, but I try to do it every day. I even got a self guided journal.
mm,
But the what to be grateful for, it took me almost losing everything for then me to say something as little as, I remember down there, it hit me. I live out in the country up here, being down close to Baltimore. It was never quiet, or like I couldn't hear the crickets, which was, I guess I just took it so much for granted that then when it was taken away from me, I missed it.
mm,
So, um, trying to be remind myself of what I should be grateful for. My gratitude journal is what I do,
yeah.
and definitely slowing down to live more in the moment, more in the present. I've been not accused, but I know I've done it for majority of my life. I've always been looking forward to the next thing. Like, okay, well, if I do this, then we're going to do this. And I started it slow here, like first just with my daughter, and we've always been close, but we're like very, very close now. I just talk to her, and I don't try to plan 5 things in a row. I just want to, hey, this is what we're going to do today, or this is what she says. I want to play on the playground. It's like, okay, we're going to go to the playground, and we're just going to play there until she's done.
Yeah.
Um, just be happy
Mm,
in the moment. Um, like I said, for me personally, I know it's not for everybody, but definitely my faith has helped a lot. I've recently been part of a discipleship, um, which has opened my eyes a lot to that part of faith. But that, to me, that's very important. So that's um, one thing that I've been taking pretty seriously: scripture reading and reflection on that. And like when I work out, I listen to like basically death metal.
mm.
But I've slowed that down. Not at the gym, but like around my house. If I'm not like, I don't put the TV on for like background noise or anything anymore. I actually started listening to like background meditation music, and I've found that it's just kind of more calming if I just want to sit down and read, or I don't really want to do anything. Uh, Little things like that have just made me, like, I guess you could say it, like calmer or happier.
Yeah.
Um, Not always going.
Yeah.
And a big part of my re- recovery process of discharge was getting back into fitness. I've always worked out, but over the past couple of years, whether it be stress, drinking, making excuses, I kind of just lifted here and there, didn't do anything serious. I used to be competitive, not like high level, but I used to compete in CrossFit. And I noticed that it was almost a trickle down effect. If I was regimented on my workouts and my diet, I felt better,
Mhm.
slept better. And that was part of my discharge paperwork for my own like aftercare plan. I've been back into CrossFit. I go at 5:30 in the morning. I try to eat better, um, but definitely the cardio, weights, sleep, definitely not staying awake for no reason. I try to go to bed at the same time every night, wake up at the same time. I like a schedule, and it definitely has helped me thrive in that. That especially that I don't go out to bars anymore. That
Yeah.
my late night is like 11, so I definitely sleep a lot more now.
I'm a pumpkin by 11. But I want to kind of recap some of these things because I'm a really big fan of action? Like how can you move forward? And we talked a little bit about this offline, but there is growth. There is a
Mhm.
such thing as post-traumatic growth, and there is a way to improve yourself. And I really appreciate you sharing that, sharing everything that you've been through, but then also kind of this the silver lining or the light at the end so that anyone who's listening who's gone through maybe not the exact same thing. And that's the thing that one of the conversations I have a lot, I think we compare situations a lot of like it kind of goes back to what we said, of like, well, this person doesn't know what I'm going through. But I think if we can sit here and say, hey, we may have different situations. It might not be exactly the same, but we can relate to a lot of the things, like, and I'm sure that there are a lot of people who are listening to this who can relate to some of the things that you said or that I've said throughout this conversation. And then understanding that, you have the opportunity to heal and to process and to grow and to thrive in spite of or because of these things. And I really appreciate the actionable things that you said have helped you because sometimes we don't hear that. It's just like, oh, I feel better, but there's no like tangible, these are the things that have helped me. And so I wanted to
Mhm.
kind of recap some of these things because I actually agree with everything that you said, but having gratitude, there's so much science behind this. And I had a conversation with an individual who had also planned their suicide, and they said that they were at such a point in their life where they didn't feel like there was anything to be grateful for. And so they had to artificially create gratitude for themselves, and they would buy themselves like a bouquet of flowers every week, and they would make themselves sit down and journal and try to find things that they were grateful for. And by doing that they were then eventually able to kind of exercise the muscles of gratitude to be able to then
Mhm.
identify more positive things in their life. So, anyone who's listening, if you are in a space where maybe you don't know if there's anything to be grateful for, that might be something that you can do. But gratitude, presence, faith, fitness, slowing down, and having a routine. Those are the things that I kind of wrote down. Does that really kind of encapsulate a lot of the things?
Yes, definitely. And I was just gonna say, if people are saying this is the one I got on Amazon that I
Mhm.
use,
Love it.
it's pre-filled out. It's nice. It helps because it's if I want to journal, like I can always use a notebook, but this is kind of just prompts that change every day too. So one of the workers down there in Maryland that I was also became close friends with, he was retired from Baltimore. He's done a gratitude journal for like years, and one day up in class, he was like, just shout out dates, and he wasn't lying. He was pulling out gratitude things from a couple years ago here and there, and he said he did it every day because then somebody one date that came up, he just said the sun is shining. So he said he just instilled to do it, even if there was nothing that came to mind or anything significant. Just still write it down.
Yeah,
And that definitely was an eye opener for me. That I was always trying to focus on big events. That I there's probably something in there that says like I hear the crickets tonight. I just don't really have anything specific to write, but I want to try and keep up on it and make it a habit.
I love that. I love that idea that like it doesn't have to be something big. It can
Hmm.
be something small. And I do think that we tend to do that. And our brains are wired to look for the negative. And
Hmm.
we almost have to unwire and like reprogram ourselves to start looking for more positive things. And I really appreciate that you said it could be something really small. It could be the crickets chirping. I think
Hmm.
that's really a beautiful sentiment. I have really only two questions for you left, and I know I've taken a lot more time than I asked for, so I
Oh,
really appreciate
okay. I'm,
that.
I'm having a good time.
You had said that previously you were really a private person. You kept a lot of
Mhm.
things to yourself. You didn't really share these things with other people. And now, fast forward, We are on a podcast talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
And I know that you are now, becoming a part of your peer team within your organization. How important is it for you now to share your story with others? And, you know, do you think that you have found more strength in your vulnerability to be able to share some of these things?
I'd say so. You know, I could say that I'm still a pretty private person. However, when it relates to, I guess, certain events, maybe I should be more outspoken, or not outspoken, but more open about how I perceived all the issues that came with my dad being killed, or little things that added up over time, but like work discipline things, or obviously my substance abuse that led me into the Harbor of Grace. That I don't want someone else to do that. Um, I know how hard it. I know how firsthand how hard it was for me to even accept help. That I I'm hoping that if people can hear my story or advice or anything, that I can prevent somebody from going down the same rabbit hole that I went on. And also, I think it could help break the stigma that I'm going to be open about it. And it's also like everything else. I heard some rumors, but the best way to, I guess, get back at the rumors or people that are going to talk bad about it is I'll just get out ahead of it.
Mm.
I'm not. It happened. It's a fact. I own it. Um, and I think, or I hope it would earn me the respect of some of my friends and peers, that if they were in the same boat I was, or even just partially, that they could come to me. I know people know that I'm a trustworthy person. I would help them, or
Yeah.
try to help them, or point them in the direction to get help. I'm not saying I can fix anybody, but like get the resources, or coordinate it, like what happened to me, do that in turn for somebody else.
Yeah. I don't think that there's anything scarier, but more courageous than vulnerability. That has been the scariest part of my um, path, I guess, with all of this, is to do that, to get in front of it, to get in front of people, to talk about these things, and I honestly never ever thought that I would ever do that. I always thought that I would just give this perception that I am perfect and everything is good. And I have realized that there's nothing more unrelatable than someone who gets in front of a room and is like, nothing's impacted me. My life has been perfect up until this point. Like, I'm
Yeah.
great, and if someone gets up in front of me this like today and says that, I'm calling BS. No one gets through this
Yeah.
life unscathed. We all have
Mhm.
things that we're going through. And I think that having the ability to be vulnerable, to talk about these things, I do think saves lives. I think that the more we can have these conversations, people are going to understand that they're not alone in their situations, that there are other
Mhm.
people who have gone through these things. The more that we can have conversations about the resources that have helped us to get through these things, the more that people are going to understand that there are ways to get on the other side. There are things that you can do. There is help out there. There is support out there. And I think that one of the things that, and we talked about this earlier, but one of the things that I really truly regret was judging other people's situations and writing it off because I didn't think that it was a big deal to me. And I think
Mhm.
that a lot of times what we're seeing, especially with the stigma and like you're talking about, like the peer stuff of like people kind of talking about it or judging it, I think is, at least for me, one of my biggest regrets because who am I to judge someone else's situation? And everything is going to impact people in different ways. And I think the more we can have that sense of empathy and community for each other and support each other through the hardest times, like we talk a lot of, in this podcast about, you're showing up for your career for people who are experiencing the worst time in their lives. And,
Hmm.
you're showing up for them with that empathy and that support. And I think that sometimes, excuse me, sometimes we forget to show up for each other and peers in that same way. And so my hope is that through these conversations, we can start to kind of bring that barrier down and share that there is um, growth and healing in that every single person has value.
I agree. I mean, if you asked me a year ago if I'd be, on a podcast talking about my own suicide attempt and everything else, I would have said like hell no. And also now 2025 me looking back at 20, I don't know, 22 me, I'm like, it was a miserable person.
Yeah.
So like that people can change, and I hope if we the work you're doing and the EAP all across the country, peer support, that we can get ahead of it. Because also, anybody listening, if you think you're alone, I was convinced I was alone. I can tell you you're not, because the entire time I was at Harbor of Grace for 30 days, there was a wait list
Mm,
and there was never an empty bed.
yeah. Well, and something to note that I don't think you mentioned earlier, but you did tell me offline is that this is a center for first responders.
Yes, Harbor of Grace in Maryland is exclusively for police, fire, EMS. Um, I'm not sure where they draw the line. I can't speak on that. But at my time there, it was all police, fire, and EMS. And all the workers are previous, either retired, resigned early, or something. They all have a hand in police and fire. I've I've told many people, and I'll say it again today. If it wasn't for me wanting to come home so bad to see my daughter, I would have stayed there.
Yeah.
I I truly enjoyed it. That place 100% saved my life. I have nothing but good things to say about Harbor of Grace.
Thank you for sharing that. And, you know, I think that statement of if you think you're alone, know that there was a wait list, and these were all first responders who were
Yeah.
seeking help and resources. And
There are people still talk to this day. We made lifelong bonds of, we all had something in common. We all ended up there for something, a mix of mental health and substance abuse, or just one or the other. But we all bonded, exchanged numbers. Some of us still communicate outside. I have two friends that I talk to from there daily that I've actually met with them like a few times since we've been out. So I mean, it's a great place, and I was scared, more scared than I've probably ever been in my life. My first day there, and then by day 5, I started to like process stuff, and by the end, when I knew I was getting ready to come home again, aside from my daughter, I didn't want to leave.
yeah,
It was safe, secure. Everybody there understood me. The staff was amazing. Like I can't say enough good things about it. That if you are struggling and you need a place like that, I 10 out of 10 recommend it.
yeah. Thank you. My final question for you is,
Mhm.
maybe I mean, I usually ask this question in the context of wellness, and you can kind of pick how you want to go with this, but
Okay.
what words of wisdom would you share with someone who is maybe earlier in their career or maybe who is currently struggling? Maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
Um, I would say something that's helped me along the way would definitely be have a work and like have your work friends, but have friends separate from the police world or even the first responder world. I've seen it firsthand, and I've heard the stories of older generations, especially like I've been around cops my whole life. That's all you'll do is end up drinking and telling war stories,
Mm.
and that doesn't really progress anything. Um, there is a time and place for that. Like I love talking. Like some of my closest friends are my coworkers, and we'll joke about work or whatever. But the times that I almost get like a recharge is I have a very close group of friends outside of work. Like specifically Ben and Steve. They're not in my line of work. We hunt, we fish. Like it's not first responder talk. Um, to me personally, that is a huge like relief, and it's just nice. And early on, I would say if something's bothering you, find a coworker that you trust to talk to, and if you need more help than that, I hope your administration backs you. Um, they should have EAP programs in place, and definitely reach out sooner rather than later. Don't let it snowball into what I just spoke about. I think I don't want to say everything happens for a reason. I'm grateful that everything has worked out the way it has at this point, up until like while we're now speaking. But I have wondered what would happen if instead of me ending up in Chief Kittner's office in the beginning of October, if I had approached him or the captain in say July. I I have thought about that. If I knew I was in a downward spiral, but I don't know if maybe I would have saved it earlier if I reached out for help.
Yeah.
Instead of I am guilty of that stigma. I didn't want people to think I was broken, and it just made it worse.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you for coming on here and sharing your story, being vulnerable, and honestly being a source of inspiration, for other people who are struggling. And I do want to, once again, kind of give a shout out to your administration and your agency and the Recovery Center, and everyone
Mhm.
who's helped you along the way, because I do think that that is a way for us to move forward and start breaking that stigma is all the people who showed up and supported you. But also, I want to give you credit for all the work that you've done to help yourself and to get to the point that you are today. And I will not speak preemptively because I know that you said that you don't want to, be too cocky
Mhm.
with it or whatever, but I will be reaching out to you. Is it October 5th?
7th.
I'll be reaching out to you on October 7th to wish you congratulations on a year
Thank you.
sober. And
Thanks.
I really, it's an honor to have you on the show sharing your story. So thank you for coming on here. And again, like, for anyone who's listening, we scheduled for an hour and I think it's been almost an hour and a half. So, um,
It's fun.
thank you. Thank you for coming on here. And
Of course.
if there's anything else I missed, I'll kind of let you, take the floor and sign off.
Just wanted to say thank you very much for having me on here, and I hope my story or parts of it or anything that me or Paige talked about can help somebody. That's This is my first podcast. I'm not a public speaker at all. So I hope I can just help somebody, or you would at least enjoyed it and show it to somebody else who might need to hear it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.